Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good, good, good. Well, so lovely to meet you last week. Was it last week? No, week before.
Was it not last week? Oh my gosh, I don't know. Yeah, how
Yeah.
did you enjoy it? Startup Day. I didn't get to talk to you too much.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was amazing, actually. I actually interviewed Umi from Breeze last week.
Great.
Or was it the week before? Did we interview? No, I interviewed her after the event. Yeah, and we were
Yeah.
chatting about it and just saying it's actually amazing what Karen Teresa managed to do in what felt like a really short space of time. It's quite
Uh,
incredible.
yeah, that day was packed full and so many people got to speak and share what they're working on. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was saying to Umi actually that I didn't realize quite how much of a hub Austin was. Like I didn't realize
Oh
there was
yeah.
such a convergence of Bitcoiners there. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
everybody's here. I mean, obviously some
Yeah.
people flew in, but even the people that were actually living there, a lot of them said, "Oh yeah, I moved down here during the pandemic because all the Bitcoiners were here." And I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
interesting."
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was like a big boom of people moving like 2022. I feel like that's when I moved. And so at that point it was just like we couldn't wait to like get meetups set up so we could just hang out with each other because we're all moved. We have no friends. We just want to be friends with each other. And it's like still happening too. So it's really fun.
That's really funny. Where did you come from?
I came from Utah.
Oh, really? Oh, so quite a way
Mhm.
then. Wow.
Yep,
Wow.
drove a U-Haul all the way across the states. Done that 2 times now. Wouldn't
Wow.
recommend it.
Nice. Wow, that's quite an American thing, isn't it? The big road
Yeah,
trip. So I
yeah.
guess you should probably introduce yourself before we start
Sure.
talking about your life story.
Yeah, sure. My name's Jana, but I like to go by Pleb Poet when I'm doing things online. I don't know. I'm not really sure if I fully fledged out my pseudonym personality, but I don't know if I have to. But it's Pleb Poet. It's plebpoet.com. And I write some stuff there. I do some pleb crafts sometimes. That's something I didn't mention, but I sometimes make little craft workshops, just whatever I can do. I just am a creative person, so I just kind of do whatever feels like I want to do next.
Nice. So what was your backstory? Because well, the context that I met you under was that you were hosting a couple of panels at
Hmm.
the event, the Pleb
Hmm.
Laptop Builder event week before last, which were awesome, by the way. I thought the community one was great as well. Really loved that one. But I
Good.
thought both of them were fantastic. I think the community one, just because I run Access Tribe, I
Yeah,
found it very relatable.
good.
But
I'm glad.
yeah, it was just interesting to hear about how like they had startups in San Antonio and how you guys were all kind of working together and stuff. It was super fascinating. But I'm really curious about like how your journey got you here. So you grew up in
Mm.
Utah, is that so that's where you're originally from?
No, I grew up in Oklahoma,
Oh,
just north of Texas. So I kind of did a big circle around the states before I came down to Austin. Um,
wow.
yeah, me and my husband are both from Oklahoma, so we've moved across the country together to get here. Um, just a good Midwest, I guess, Southwest, good old country-ish girl. I don't know. Um, I
Did you
just
grow up on a ranch?
not quite.
Yeah.
I had 1 acre, so the dream was there, but not quite. Um, my grandpa was a peanut farmer.
Really?
That's that was kind of fun. Yeah.
Huh.
Um,
I'm
but
going to
yeah,
ask a stupid question. How do peanuts grow on trees?
that's not a stupid question. I asked him the same question, and he didn't really give me a straightforward answer. He's kind of, but I'm gonna assume it's more like a bush. That's kind of what I got.
Right.
Not quite a tree, but like a bush. But they're kind of the
Yeah.
same. So, not a stupid question.
Well, the first time I ever saw a Brussels sprout, there was a photographer that I knew back in London, and he started doing all these beautiful photographs of vegetables. He used
Oh,
to do
really?
nudes primarily, but then he did like a vegetable series.
Oh, really?
And actually, sorry, he did nudes. I posed for one of his nudes, so that's how I
Yeah,
know. Whole other story. But
awesome. Female power.
I know the pictures. There's pictures of me much skinnier with a like really great body, like on the internet somewhere. But he did this vegetable series, and I remember going to his studio, and he had this stalk that had like all these Brussels sprouts on it, and I'd never seen a Brussels sprout where it grew, and I
Right.
felt so stupid because I was like, oh, they grow on like this thick stalk, and they're just like little balls all over the stalk. And I
Oh,
was
that
like,
is kind of weird. Because I would imagine it like a flower. It's not really like a flower, though, is it?
no, I mean, I don't know how they come out of the ground, but what he
Yeah.
had was like, I mean, I'd say the stalk was, I might be getting this slightly wrong, but it was about that thick, and it just had
Wow.
all the sprouts all over it. Yeah, that's what it looked like in
Well,
its unfrozen, un kind of processed. Oh, my
yep.
little light went out here, but
Yep.
unprocessed state. So yeah, it
Yep.
was just a bit kind of odd because I was like, I can't believe I've eaten Brussels sprouts like most of my life, and I've never actually
Yeah.
seen what they look like. So
Yeah.
wasn't a stupid question then about the peanuts. That's good. So how did you end up going from peanuts to Utah?
So well really, so I'm with my husband Austin, and we're in Oklahoma, and we're just not really sure. Kind of my story is just like I graduated college, and I was very anchorless and just kind of had no idea about what I was going to make my life become. I didn't feel like I got anything useful from college that would kind of direct me. But I studied English in college, and I don't regret that. That's kind of like what influences like my love for literature and poetry. But just after that, like I think back about who I was, and I had a huge transformation after like getting interested in Bitcoin. But that person that I was before that was just kind of like wild and had no like nothing to like connect me to reality that I was a part of, you know? And I
Yeah.
think that's the story with a lot of people. Um, so Austin starts his Bitcoin journey before I do, and I kind of see it transform his life, and I'm like, well, hey, maybe we'll be rich one day. Like this is cool. But it's just your like computer nerd thing, like so you can have that. But he ends up getting his first software job. That's what took us to Utah. And his goal was to become like working for a Bitcoin company, but we weren't quite there yet, right? So there's kind of like both of us kind of starting from zero, just in our interest in Bitcoin, like leading us in like how we can get closer to it.
And so
So
what year was this?
like 2021
Huh.
is when we moved. Yes. So we're kind of picking up ourselves like after COVID and like whole new life. We're gonna go to Utah. We're just gonna like get started and see if we can get any closer to this thing that's like transformed our lives. And there's actually in Utah, they call it, well, everywhere's that like tech people are moving, they kind of want to adopt like the silicone whatever. Utah's the Silicon Slopes. So there's a lot of tech people that are moving there or had moved there that had just more of like the exodus from California type of thing.
Mm.
Also went to Utah. Um, so there was like a little bit of Bitcoin hype that had made it where we were there, but nothing like meetups or regular like community building type of.
So I didn't realize actually that you were married to Austin. He was the guy at the event with the
Mhm.
glasses.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's your husband. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. I've made the
Yeah.
connection now. Got it.
He's
When did
the
he get into Bitcoin then?
2017.
Oh, he's practically an OG.
Right. Right. That was the time. He bought a minor in 2017. So he's been really trying all of the things.
Oh, wow. So that's interesting. So you really dove in 2021 when you moved to Utah, then that was kind of your orange pill moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you'll let me, I want to tell you like the story. I kind of want to tell you about my like waking up from the Matrix story, that then I took the orange pill because this happened.
Oh, yeah. I'd
So
love to hear that. Do it.
I'm kind of describing myself like before I was interested in Bitcoin at all. I was just like your typical like progressive liberal like feminist. I did have blue hair even. And this
I love
was
how you
like
sound like you're confessing to that, like you've
I
committed an
really, but I
egregious
really,
sin.
it's true. I feel like it's a confession. Like I need people to know like this, but I think something that you'll get from my story that's a little bit unique that maybe you don't hear in other orange pill stories is you don't really hear like this like progressive liberal like coming into this space, or if they have, they kind of don't talk about that.
Right.
You know. And that's a lot of part of my story too, is just the feeling of what you can and can't talk about. It's like very much I feel like I escaped. Um, but so this is like 2020. The summer of 2020 is when this like event happens to me. And this was in Oklahoma City. But that at that time, if you remember, and we've kind of gotten past COVID now, and I feel like nobody really wants to talk about it anymore or really kind of go back to,
Oh, I
especially.
do. Have you seen my Twitter?
No, I haven't. What are you talking about? The
Ranting the whole
protest
time. Oh
thing?
my God.
Yeah. Well, that's the energy I like, the ranting about it, because it's like there's lessons to be learned, I think, from that period of time that are going to be useful in the future going forward.
I think I'm particularly rabid because I'm a reformed branch Covidian, and it's a bit like being an ex-smoker, you know how they become very anti-smoking.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
me.
Okay, yeah. No, I feel that same way. I mean, that's another reason I want to talk about it too. And anyway, it was the time of like the George Floyd protests. So I was like very much involved in well, it's weird to say involved too, because like another feature about this time was like nobody was really talking to each other and nobody could see each other or hang out. The only time you saw your friends was at the protests on the streets. Um, and I was like involved in this thing because I was very much bought in from my college days. Like I wasn't given a way, or it wasn't encouraged for me to like question things. And so I hadn't gotten in the habit of doing that, especially when it came to like the cultural and the political like wave at the time. And it was just so strong. I think especially around my time in college, like 2020 and before. So I was just caught up in that, and I was going to protests. So I want to tell you about this one protest. It's the last protest I ever went to. It was very dramatic. Um, we got together in a park first, and we performed the 8 minutes of silence. So we're all like laying on the ground, pretending not to breathe, or you're trying to be in memory or whatever of like this performance of like this is what happened to George Floyd. Another thing about me is that I was raised in church, and so this I'm familiar with this like the feeling that comes over you when you know you're like participating in a symbol, like you're doing something physical, but it has some type of like spiritual meaning. Like this is like what we call
Like a
worship.
ritualistic thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so as much as I believed in what I was doing, like at this protest, that was the feeling I was expecting to feel. But like from the beginning, I just like it wasn't working, and I kind of wanted to laugh about like what we were doing. I couldn't take it seriously, and so I knew like something was weird about this day. Like I wish wasn't like connected to it, and it felt off, and I could kind of see that in everyone else. Because once we started to actually march in the streets, um, it's just like a normal day. There's like people walking around, but we're like maybe a group of 100, not huge. People are trying to start up chants. Like the one at the time was like the no justice, no peace,
Mm.
no racist police. And it's just the chant was so weak. It just like it couldn't stay, like it couldn't sustain itself. It would just die off over and over again. And I was kind of like, well, this is kind of odd. And the feeling also of just like nobody trusting each other. Like I see my friends in the crowd, but this isn't a time for us to like hang out. We're not like, I'm not saying hello to them because this is very serious. And it's just like the whole event had like this solemn, and I don't know, I just like felt trapping in this like moment, and it was all leading to something, right? Because we're walking down the street. But as we're walking, someone from the side like kind of begins to like run along the side of the crowd and starts yelling at us to turn around. Like we can't go this way. If we go this way, something will happen. She's got a megaphone and she's just yelling at us to turn around. Everyone in the street in this protest just like turns around and walks back the way that we came. So like I do it. I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is fine. And then maybe we take 5 steps, and then someone else who's now in front of us starts yelling at us, and they're like, no, we really need to go back this other way. Like we need to turn around. We're supposed to be going this way. And then like nothing, like everyone just turns around and then starts going the other way. And this is the moment, like I'm just I like wake up and I'm like, who am I listening to? Where are we going? Like, I don't know. Why are we not, as the collective, aware of where we're all headed at the same time? And it was just that, like, I don't actually know what I'm involved in, I don't think. I don't know who's got the idea of like what are we aligned on? We're not aligned on anything, and so we can't actually get anything done if we're all just like these disunified individuals who are just
Sheep.
exactly just doing whatever anyone happens to yell at us from wherever they're at. So I didn't keep walking. I just immediately cut out of the crowd. I didn't even like say anything to my friends. They kept walking and I just went home. And I've just like, I mean, since that point, I started asking a lot of questions and haven't returned to any protests since then. But that really began my like,
Hmm.
um, just starting to ask any questions about, well, what do I actually think about this? Instead of like,
Wow.
why am I just taking it from somebody else?
Isn't that crazy that you just had that moment of realization, like almost spontaneously?
Yeah, it
Huh.
felt like it was a movie like happening to me. But I
Wow.
feel like a lot of people had, I mean, I feel like maybe that was like a dramatization of that moment that I feel like a lot of people had in 2020 of just like literally the masks coming off and being like maybe people's intentions aren't just aligned. Like we think we have this idea of what we want to see. We think we have this idea of change, but no, we're all just kind of at the whim of whoever's loudest at the time. And
Yeah,
that's
I
what
think
I'm
have you read I don't know if you know René Girard, but he was famous
mm,
for yeah, like sort of the mimetic thing. His
hmm.
work is just for anyone listening, his work is a bit heavy to get through, but I read a really good book by a guy called Luke something. I've forgotten the last name, but it's called Wanting, but it's like a layperson's summary of like
Okay.
Girard's theories, which is
Okay.
way more accessible. It's really easy to read, really easy to get through. But it was funny because I started reading that in 2021, and I must have started reading Girard, I don't know, sometime early 21, late 2020,
Yeah.
because Eric Weinstein was talking about him on a podcast. And so I just got
Sure.
interested in it. But what I reflected a lot about that on COVID, where I talked to so many people who got into Bitcoin during COVID, which I found
Okay.
really, or during lockdown, I guess we should call it. But
Mm.
I found that really incredible. And I was like, that's
Hmm.
really interesting. And I was reflecting a lot at the time, not so much on the whole kind of lockdown scenario in 2021. But hang on a second. I think the dog wants to go out.
Oh, sure.
Just wants to go off and get a drink. You're going to have to stay outside then.
Mm.
Behind him. There's another one behind. So if you see her, she keeps
Okay.
lying with their paws up on the thing. So,
Oh, yeah.
so unprofessional, this podcast, like disruptions everywhere.
I was afraid my cat might actually like come jump on my lap at some point. It might happen.
Actually, it wasn't when I interviewed Umi, but it was when we had a phone call. We got introduced by Alien Azorio, you know, who works for the Human Rights Foundation.
Mm.
And we ended up having this like really long conversation for about an hour and a half. But it was so funny. We were on Zoom and all of a sudden I just see this cat ass like right next to her face.
They love to do that. This the behind for
I'm
sure.
like, is that an ass of a cat? And she's like, oh yeah, I've got five. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh, wow, that's a house full.
Yeah, an apartment full, I think.
Mm.
Crazy. Yeah. So anyway, back to Rene Girard. So what I think happened with COVID was, or with
Mhm.
lockdown, was that people got kind of broken out of their mimetic pattern of going into an
Sure.
office, doing what everybody else does. Like, this is what you're supposed to achieve in life. Here's your thing. And they kind of got like shaken out of it very
Yeah.
abruptly. And I think for a lot of people that started the process of really thinking like, who am I? What do I want to do with my life? What's going
Yeah.
on in the world? Um, and that deep thinking that happened without all of the distractions of like your friendship groups and your usual peer circle and all that kind of stuff. I think for a lot of people, it really resulted in a desire for a different life.
Yeah. Just like the reevaluating. And it's that like, am I actually aligned with the people like I go around with? Like, do we at the core we don't really talk, we don't have the chance to really talk about um where we're going in life, what future we want to achieve. We just kind of fall in with like our interests. And I think that's another thing, like post lockdown, I think it's easier to make friends because we're kind of more sure of what's the future we want to see and talking about it. And like that can really make you like click with somebody else and be like, oh great, we're going the same path. We're gonna be friends.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely find that with the Bitcoin community, if I meet a Bitcoiner, I can almost be sure it doesn't matter how divergent we are in politics,
Right.
lifestyle, age, anything. It's like I've got so much to. I had dinner with a few people at the in Austin,
Mm,
and then one of the guys that was at dinner, never met him before. He was actually sat at the other end of the table, so we barely spoke, but we were both staying in the same hotel. So when we crossed the street, I said, "Oh, do you want to go for a drink at the bar?" And he and
yeah.
I sat there for about 2 hours chatting. Never met this guy in my life before. Like had
Right.
unbelievably deep conversation. And that was
Right.
after sitting at dinner and having an unbelievably deep conversation, which is a whole
Yep.
other conversation. But with this other
Sure.
guy, and I was like, that just doesn't happen in normie life.
Right. Totally. I find that happening for myself, like at conferences and things like that too. Like something I'll notice is like how quickly you can get into like a conversation specifically about God with somebody who's like
That
also
was my
interested in
whole
Bitcoin.
conversation at dinner.
Mm, yeah, and I'm sure it took like 10 minutes and then you're like, "Oh, I believe this because of this major experience I had as a child," or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, it was more about the kind of oh gosh, that's a whole other conversation in itself, but it was more about the whole concept of reality and like what God
Wow.
is.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite an intense conversation and it was funny actually because most of the next day I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. I was just like
Um,
having a reflection on it. So I'm
did
curious
you?
as well. So while you were in your blue hair marching phase, we'll
Yep.
call it, and Austin's already several years down into the rabbit hole at this
Mm,
point. So how did that play out for you guys in terms of like your journeys? Because you're still very much living in
mhm.
this kind of
Yeah.
student progressive world, I guess, if we want to call it that. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming that he's probably somewhat not by that point.
Yeah. He's like listening to Jordan Peterson, but I have no idea. It's like a secret. He's like keeping a secret about it. Yeah. We it didn't like necessarily interrupt our relationship, which I think is kind of crazy, like looking back, because he was really just transforming it. And I saw it, but I didn't really realize how deep it went. But we would have like arguments about like, is wealth inherently unjust? And I was on the side of like anyone who has wealth, they're probably not doing the right thing. And he's like, just evaluate that a little bit. We
Are
would
you guys
double up.
married at this point already?
We got married in 2019, so yes,
Oh,
at the end of
okay.
2019. Yeah.
Wow, that's really fascinating. And what
Mhm.
did you observe that was different about him then? Like,
Well, for he was trying all kind of the like health hacks a little bit, like cold showers and the like sleeping schedule, like doing the one thing where I don't even know who this came from. It was probably before like Andrew Huberman's podcast, but I imagine he would talk about it. But it's like splitting up your sleep into like small increments and then like having big, like wide open gaps where you're like focused during like the middle of the night. He was trying things like that.
oh, I've not heard of that. Oh
Yeah,
God, I'd be so grumpy.
I know. That one didn't last very long. And he used to be vegan and I used to be vegetarian. Um, and so that was one thing like he shared with me too, just kind of how he came around on that whole issue. But I love to tell people who he used to be because he is like not the academic progressive, but the like underground music culturally progressive. So it's very funny to compare us now to who we were when we were just young ones, but we're still young. So I'm sure we'll have another transformation at some point.
Yeah, I mean, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you.
Yeah, And I'm
And so
thankful
what
for
happened
it.
then? So you had this epiphany then on the march, and then what happened next in your journey?
Yeah, so the next I had two conversations. So I went to two different people to start to ask my questions. And one person was a friend of mine who had been there at the march, who was like pretty outspoken about like, keeping everyone in check on all the progressive rules at the time. So I was like, they'll help me, they'll kind of know. Uh, and the thing I got from that conversation was um I'm never going to be able to do exactly the right thing because at the end of the day, I'm a white person and those are just the bad people. So I was like, eventually, I was sitting across from my friend, realizing eventually you probably are going to come for me by no fault of my own. So I was kind of like that. I don't love that. I don't know. I don't know if this is a necessarily good place to like grow and figure out how to be a person if I'm going to be judged this way. And then the next person I had a conversation with was Austin. And really, I was talking to him about just like privacy and like surveillance was something that was so strange back in 2020, especially just everyone was lying about what was going on at the protests. And so you didn't trust anybody. And so many things were being said about like what people knew about you if you showed up and like if your phone was like giving away data and who was buying it. I don't know what was true. So I'm asking Austin, like, everything is very strange and heightened and intense, but you're kind of collected and calm and seem like you know what you're doing. Like, why are you not freaking out? And then he was literally just like, well, Bitcoin is this thing, this network that kind of protects me as an individual and I'm participating in. And I was like, not expecting that answer. I was like, that is interesting. Maybe I'll take a look. So he put on Max and Stacy's like Kaiser report that day.
He came out of the closet and was like, "Well, I've been listening to Jordan Peterson."
Yep. Yep. We dove right in.
Oh my God, that is too funny.
Mhm.
Wow. And did this precede your move to Utah then, right?
Yeah, by a few
Right.
months. Yep. Yep.
And so what happened to the friendships that you had at that period of time? Then are you still friends with those people? Like what's that like for
Well,
now that you've gone through this journey?
yeah, it messes with my head a lot. I don't really There's never been like a clear point. I know that they've seen me change. Um, but another thing about like how I've changed is like I'm not trying to live my life on social media as much as I was.
Mm,
And so like I don't know how much they've noticed and they haven't asked. So I like the idea of like being able to live my example and maybe that will be interesting, maybe kind of like I did with Austin, like what's different about you, you're acting this way. um I guess I'm just kind of holding out, maybe that will happen,
mhm.
but it
I was
hasn't
thinking
yet.
when I was on my Bitcoin journey, my husband sat me down and he's like, "Are you losing your mind?"
And you said maybe.
Which is funny actually, because he told me about Bitcoin back in 2011, and at the time he's technical, so
Wow.
he was all excited
Wow.
about this new thing, and I was just like, "Oh God, that sounds really boring." Now I'm like, "Oh
Yep.
my God,
Yep.
10 years
Yep.
wasted."
Did you do a little bit of a flip flop? Was he less interested later?
Well, I think he was working on a project with a friend of his, and they were looking at using, the Bitcoin blockchain to do various different things in the music space, and
Oh, okay.
And then that eventually died a death. Like, life just took over. We're both busy
Yeah.
doing stuff or whatever. And then I worked in TradFi for nearly 20 years. And probably the last 3 to 5 years, I was involved in the corporate innovation space. And so
Mm,
I thought I was quite familiar with it, actually. I thought I understood
yeah.
blockchain technology because all of the banks are
Yeah.
implementing, some kind of a blockchain project or initiative. I mean, they all flop, but,
Oh,
they
yeah.
need to
Yep.
grapple with it and figure out how
Yep.
to use it to their advantage rather than be destroyed by it. um and so I thought I understood it quite well from a technical perspective in terms of like this is what it does.
Yeah.
I just didn't get any of the economic and human significance for it until,
Mm.
funnily enough, um, when I left banking, my mum actually sent me a Jordan Peterson video because I was like, oh, my colleagues are going to crypto companies. I think, I might start looking into that. And
Ooh,
so she said, oh, she loves Jordan Peterson. I'm not particularly a fan, but
okay.
she was like, oh, you should listen to this podcast. He's just interviewed 4 Bitcoiners. And that was Robert Breedlove, John Vallis, Richard James, the
Yeah.
Australian filmmaker, and Gigi. And she
Yeah.
hadn't watched it. So the next day she calls me up and it was like a 90-minute long thing. It's called The Future of Money, question mark,
Yep.
or Bitcoin, The Future of Money. And she called me up and she said, oh, have you watched it yet? Is it worth watching? And I was just like, well, it's changed my life. And she's like,
Right.
what? And I was just like,
Yeah.
I've been in financial markets for 20 years and I've understood nothing about money. And I was so blown away by this whole conversation. And then
Mm-hmm.
I started listening to Breedlove's podcast, just happened to
Mm-hmm.
pick the Jeff Booth series. So I listened to that. Then I've
Oh,
read
that's
like The Price of Tomorrow, read Gigi's
right.
book, The 21 Lessons I Learned Down the Rabbit Hole. And then, well, you know what it's like. It just becomes an
Yeah.
obsession. Then it's like 20 hours a week on studying Bitcoin and,
Oh, yeah.
obsessively.
Yeah. And a great time to do it too, because there was so many good podcasts and books and articles coming out, I feel like. I mean,
Yeah.
I read one of the first like articles I read was Robert Breedlove's something about zero. What
Oh,
about
yeah.
zero?
I listened to the podcast that he did recently with somebody. Who did he go and talk to? I might have been What Bitcoin Did. He was talking to them
Hmm.
about zero. It was really he's a
Hmm.
really interesting philosopher,
Hmm.
almost, I'd say.
Yeah,
Really kind of deep
I would
thinking
agree.
and very open-minded about stuff as well, which is
Hmm.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah, it was funny because I had this whole thing about this is what my dinner conversation was kind of slightly about over in Austin, but I had this weird thing about like is Bitcoin the second coming? And I'm not a Christian, by the way,
Yeah.
but I just had this thing. I
Yeah.
was like, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
For a multitude of reasons. And I started writing a piece about it. And then I started Googling it, thinking people are going to think I'm a lunatic. I wonder if anyone else has written about this. And I
Oh,
found
yeah.
this whole long article that John Vallis had written. And I was crying reading it
Oh,
because I'm like, I'm not the only person that thinks this.
no, exactly. I think I may have read that one too.
It's
It was
amazing.
a Substack piece, right? And it was
Media. I think it was
oh,
Medium, but
Medium,
yeah.
maybe. Okay. Yeah, I felt that same way though, and a lot of the things that John Ballas talks about are like, wait, I was just thinking that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite crazy. That's another thing actually that's been interesting. I don't know if you listen to Joe Rogan, but have you noticed recently he seems to be turning into a Christian live on air? Like I don't
Oh, I
ah.
noticed bringing up the Bible a little bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but also the
that's
way
pretty
that he
funny.
talks about it, because he interviewed that
Huh.
very well-known Christian guy who's a physicist or an astro. Sorry, can you see the dog there in the background shopping around?
Just getting comfortable back there.
Yeah, astrophysicist or whatever it is. Astrophysicist, is it Stephen Meyer or something like that?
Yes, I
And
listened to that one.
and he was very combative with him. Like he wouldn't let him finish sentences. He was really quite combative. And then
Mm,
he's done 2 episodes recently. One was with Riley Gaines, the swimmer.
yep,
And
yep,
she's a Christian, but it was
yep,
interesting the way he was talking with her.
yeah,
He was sort of saying, well, I think of God like this. And I was like, this is interesting. And then he
yeah.
did one with James Lindsay recently, who, by the way, I saw on the streets in Austin. I walked past him and I was like, oh my God, it's
Oh,
James
no
Lindsay.
way.
So I think it
Oh,
must
he
have been
must
around
live
the
there.
time. He looks the same in
Oh,
real life. Yeah, he's very
yeah.
recognizable.
Okay.
Um, I mean, if you're a sort of like white male with short brown hair in America, he's very recognizable in that sense. I mean, he probably blends in rather well.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I would be hard to pick him out.
Yeah, but that was interesting because James Lindsay has spent a lot of time recently reading the Bible, and he was saying, well, I don't know if I'd say I'm a Christian, but there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Mm,
And it
yep.
was really interesting, like the conversation they had. I thought, this is really weird. It's like Joe Rogan's becoming a Christian in real time on his show.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Some of my favorite conversations that Rogan has are with his friend Duncan Trussell, another comedian. And
Oh,
they
really?
always they've talked over the years several different times, but their conversation always gets to this place where they're trying to understand where ideas come from. And it's a very spiritual conversation, and they always end up in this place. And
Hmm.
that I feel like is been the primer for Joe Rogan's conversion, if it happens. I don't know. I think he's
That's
just a curious
interesting.
guy. Yeah.
I've never listened to them, do you know? Because when I saw that he was a comedian, I was like, ugh, another comedian
Oh
that he's
yeah.
interviewed. And often, weirdly, the
Right.
comedians are quite boring.
I know. I skip those most of the time too.
Yeah, definitely skip the JRE ones. I like no interest in listening to him talk about headlocks and
Yeah. Yeah. Usually skip if that it comes up on the podcast sometimes too. I'm usually skipping through it. But
yeah.
Duncan's interesting. He is just a very spiritually forward person, like not afraid to talk about it and not afraid to be wrong about it. So several times they'll go back over things that they said before and be like, no, I kind of think this now. And I really appreciate that kind of
Wow.
conversation.
Oh, I'll go back and listen to that then. I didn't realize that. That would actually quite interest me then. I like deep, heavy conversations.
Yes. Yes.
Gosh. So, okay, so tell me about your journey now. So you've gone that you've been orange pilled. Your husband has
Yep.
confessed to being a closet closet libertarian.
The
Uh,
worst sin.
and now what happens? You go to Utah and then what's next on your journey?
Yeah. So in Utah is like that was a really big deal for me, just kind of like detaching from everything that I had known before and just really being able to ask the question of like, but who am I actually? And so then this is where I kind of start to do like my most like taking writing very seriously, doing my most like serious and focused writing work. And so what ends up coming out of that is I wrote a biography of my grandpa, the peanut farmer I was talking about. And that came out of just like I've moved away from my family, but I want to stay in touch. My grandpa is very precious to me. So I was just calling him every week and just like taking notes about things that he was saying, kind of interviewing him, but kind of letting him just tell me his stories. And that's the amazing thing. Like our our grandparents, you just like give them the opportunity, show them you're interested, and they want to talk. They want to tell you all about it. And so that's what I was working on basically for that year. And it's interesting we were talking about religion too, because kind of through looking at my grandpa's life and seeing a pattern in it of just something I see in my family and some like really starting to feel like I am a part of something. Like whereas before I had no attachments, just wild and free, and that's maybe not so good. But then afterwards, really starting with my family and my grandpa's a pastor for his whole life, and just like seeing a pattern of like we grow up with these like solid traditional values, then maybe we kind of have this period where we want to become an individual. So we want to kind of break out and do our own thing. I had a fun time doing that. But then it's like coming back to like there actually are like values worth sacrificing certain freedoms for, because that actually gives you more freedom and it actually makes you realize a future that's possible. So I completed that book project at the end of 2022 when we're already in Austin. And then that's the reason for my website existing, so I can just kind of it was the first book I wrote kind of just to prove like, can I actually write a book? Like, can I actually consume all these ideas I'm having and present it as something cohesive? And so I think I did that, and it's just a free book. Anyone can go read. I'm not selling it.
Why aren't you selling it?
It's,
Oh, you should. Take
yeah,
donations at least.
at least, yeah, you can send me some sats if you read it. I don't know. I just think I just have such a high value for like truth and how transformative just sharing truth can be. And this was something that was so personal to me. I I don't really mind if anyone else gets anything out of it, because it was such a great thing for me to do. And if somebody gets something from that, that's great. But at the end of the day, it was kind of for me, and I'm just glad it exists.
Yeah. Has your granddad read the book?
Yeah, he's gotten through it. And I got I got to get his stories from him kind of just before I think his memory is a little bit less than it was. So sometimes tell the story that he told me that I wrote down a little bit of a different way. So I'm glad we have it on record. Like this is, I think, actually more accurate.
Oh, that's funny. Wow, that's such a nice memory to have. It's funny actually because I've been interviewing my parents recently. I just suddenly realized I was like, oh, they're getting a bit old, and I kind of want to conserve some of the memories. And
Yeah.
so I just said to them, "Do you guys mind if I do like an hour every week with both of you, and I'll just sit there and
Mm.
interview you?" And it's actually been really enjoyable. I've learned a lot. I mean, I'm still doing it, but I might turn it into a book, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I would
don't know.
recommend it. And mine kind of like I kind of bookended my grandpa's story with my own. So there was a lot of self-discovery in that as well. And it also is what leads me kind of back into like what I believe about God and like faith and everything. I'm kind of working through that in this. And so
Hmm.
yeah, just a really powerful thing to produce out of like doing work on yourself, I think.
I'm going to read yours first then, because then I'll use it as a guide for the how to.
Okay.
I'm not a professional writer, so I'll be like, okay, this
Right.
is how it's done.
There you go.
Here's that. So if it sounds similar, I apologize.
Oh, that's absolutely fine.
No, I'm
Take my
kidding.
blueprint.
Like she wrote the same book, so weird. And how did you, I mean, so now you're kind of, would you consider yourself, I guess, a full-time writer and a poet now? Is that really what you feel is your calling?
I do feel it's my calling. But life is messy and I have to have a job. So it's
Fair.
hard. It's hard to say. And I still self-identity is just a weird thing for a poet. I think any poet ever is just struggling with self-identity all the time. So I want to in my good days, I'm going to tell you, yeah, I'm a writer. But on my bad days, I'm going to be like, I haven't written anything in a year, so I don't know if I can even say I'm doing it. But that's just the way it goes, I think.
I mean, look, I mean, J.K. Rowling, I think she was a teacher and then she wrote Harry Potter books in a coffee shop or something in Edinburgh where she was living as a single mum, living on like government
Uh,
handouts. So
I know it can happen. I know you can make it
yeah.
work.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I just think that, if you've got something to put out there in the world and you're very kind of candid about it and who you
Mm,
are, then
yeah.
I think it can definitely work for sure. And you're also doing work at the Pleb Lab, right? So you're running a
Yeah.
sticker shop with Nifty. Um,
Yes.
can you
Nifty.
talk about that? How you ended up, how did you
Yeah.
guys end up moving to Austin, first of all? Was that again because of your husband's job, Austin moving to Austin?
Uh, it made a lot of sense, right? Well, he quickly like realized from listening to podcasts and kind of getting to know the creators of the projects that he really liked. He was like, oh, these people are all in Austin. And then like Pleb Lab was just starting and Austin was just sold on it. He was like, we need to be there. So while we're still in Utah, he's like, that's where we're going next. And I'm just along for the ride. So I'm like, great, let's sounds great. So as soon as we moved here, we like the first person that we met was Kyle Murphy, who got Pleb Lab started, and along with Carr. And yeah, we just got to sit down at the bar with all of the Bitcoiners there, and John from who makes Zaprite was there, and we were like, we know these people from Twitter. This is so crazy. But it was awesome. We just really were able to jump in, and it's an amazing community that they've set up here to just if you have something to contribute, you can do that. Just come in and do it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, actually. Yeah, I managed to visit Pleb Lab as well, and obviously spent the day at the Commons. And I was really impressed that, like, just
Yeah,
within sort of 2 blocks of each other, you've got these amazing spaces with,
right,
all these Bitcoiners convening. And so, how
right.
did you end up working with Pleb Lab then? Like, was that just, hey, we should have some stickers, and you and Nifty decided to get together and start producing them? And can you actually talk about that
Yeah,
in detail of like how that works and where the stickers
sure,
go and all of that?
sure.
Who does the
Yeah.
design work?
That's me. I'm trying to do the design work. No, but it's a funny story. I mean, Nifty just is she's a very creative person. And just an idea machine, but a machine in a lot of ways. Like I think she's more computer than human sometimes, but I think that's a good thing for the things that she's interested in. It works. So she has
It
the
turns out we're all going to discover in a couple of years she's actually an AI.
I love that. Maybe I'll write the short story about that. That would be interesting.
Oh my God,
But
you could do a
she,
comic book. Can we make Nifty into a comic
oh,
book character?
yes, I would love to. That'd be great.
That would be so cool, though.
She
Nifty,
would love
the
that too.
Bitcoin developer AI.
Yes.
Do it, please.
I have a note right here. I'll write it down. But what started this all is that she has the Bitcoin LARP game that she invented and put together. So she's this is like creating a block transaction with like the just the data, putting the data together. She has this little like computer machine that you're running the numbers through and processing them and sending them out and competing for the block reward. So this is the whole game. She's done it at a few conferences all over the place. She's preparing kits to give them away to like a dedicated meetup, and you get to run it at your own meetup.
Oh, I
So
saw the little orange boxes. She posted that
that's
the other
it.
day. Mm.
Yes, yes, that's it. So that's the Bitcoin LARP kit. And in the middle of producing the Bitcoin LARP kit, she's realizing like stickers are kind of priced a little bit crazy to like what I actually need them for. Like I just want, she has a very small set of like particular small stickers. So the sticker machine arrives because she needs to produce the LARP kit and make her own stickers, and finding out that you can do that at a lowered cost if you're doing it on your own. So very efficient. She finds these ways to be efficient, and that's what we're doing. Now we have this it's one of the newer like printing and cutting machines. And so we're like, great, we can make maybe artisan in-house produced stickers for our Bitcoin friends and sell them with Bitcoin only, and just trying to start that up. So we've done a few now, just a few little jobs. I'll do the design, or maybe somebody already has a design, just send it to me. We'll render it, get it together in our programs, which those are also complicated, but Nifty, of course, can figure them out. I'm a little bit behind. She has to keep telling me how to do it.
What you mean programming the machine to actually make the sticker?
Yeah,
Huh. How big is the machine?
it's pretty large. It takes up a full desktop,
Oh,
one of those
really?
desks at Pleb Lab.
Hmm.
So yeah, we're doing holographic paper, we can do posters, we can do vinyl for windows. I mean, now we're a media
Sorry, what do
company.
you mean my vinyl windows? Do you mean it's like a thing of like a film that you put over the
Yeah,
window? Oh,
yeah.
really?
Stick it right
Oh,
on. Yeah.
huh.
So she had, if you went into Pleb Lab and you saw Nifty's office has base 58 in big
Mm-hmm.
letters, we made that with those are the vinyl window cling.
Oh, I love it. I might have to place an order.
Sure. You
That's
can do
really
big orders.
interesting. Yeah, I will actually. I'd love some Axis
Cool.
Tribe stickers, so I'm going to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, that's me. I get to just slave away at Pleb Lab making some stickers, but it's really fun. And so Nifty asked me if I would help her because she was like, I think you like to do craft things. And I'm like, yeah, I do. So we just made this partnership, and it's just out of necessity, but then realizing you can meet other people's needs and have fun at the same time. That's Pleb Lab, really. Scrappy, efficient when you can be, and delivering for other people's needs in the community.
That's really incredible. Wow. So much fun. So do you just go and hang out at Pleb Lab every day? You basically work there and just, you know, get on with sticker making and
Yep.
other creative projects.
Yep, like there's the stickers going on. Another thing I'm doing is they Stacker News, Car and Keon do their Stacker News Live podcast, and I'm making clips for their podcast. So
Hmm.
that's another thing. Just because I'm there, they're like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" So in my like my bio on Twitter, I just write that I'm doing whatever at Pleb Lab because things just come up, and I'll like, sure, I'm not doing anything.
That's so funny. So is your husband still working for the same software company he was in Utah, so you didn't disrupt that, or has he moved down to work it for an Austin firm?
Well, we once we moved to Austin, like after a month being here, he then was able to start working for a Bitcoin company. So switched out of just tech company to Bitcoin company
Nice.
on an app. And then got laid off from there, as it happens in the bear market, a few months ago. So since then, he's just been contracting out for other smaller projects, but also building his education platform, which is
Oh, nice. What's it called?
Pleb Devs.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he's got a couple of courses on really like how to code, but with the added if you have added interest in Bitcoin, he's going to teach you how to build for Bitcoin apps.
Amazing. Wow, that's really incredible. That is so impressive. You guys are real hustlers. That's amazing. And you've had like quite the journey going from,
Yeah.
coming out of school to having your epiphany to,
Yeah,
going via Utah, going to Austin. Do you think Austin is a permanent home now? Does it feel like somewhere you'd settle?
it does. Yeah, I do really like it. And I grew up in Oklahoma. It's a lot like Texas. Just the people are a lot similar, and I'm closer to home, and I really want to own property. I think I can do that. There's like what you feel when you're here for a little bit is like, yeah, there's a lot of people here, but there's also a lot of room.
Hmm.
Texas is just so big. And I also think if any state is going to secede, it's going to be Texas. And I want to be here when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, it's definitely a risk. I mean, I suppose it depends on your perspective whether you think that that's a good thing or not. But I do
Yeah,
think that Texas is at least half a foot out the door already.
yeah,
And I think it just gets worse. I mean, I often observe that. It's funny. I mean, I live in Canada, and I just it's interesting because the book The Sovereign Individual, James Dale
yes,
Davis and Rees Mogg, they talk about that, and this is like from what 1997 it was published, so
right.
nearly 20 years ago. Is it 20? No, more than 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. Oh, math's bad. So nearly 30 years ago, I should say. And they actually
Wow.
talk about Canada and just the economic state of Canada then, when nobody really thought Canada had problems back then, but they were very objectively sort of observing
Yeah.
the geography of the country and then also the economic
Mhm.
kind of state of it, and saying that in their opinion, as the world became more digitized, Canada would actually be one of the first countries to break apart. And it's interesting because I moved here in 2021, and I tend to agree actually from what I've seen. I
Mhm.
mean, I really struggle to see how it can hold together, actually. It's not even so much of like, oh, yeah, it's definitely going to break apart. I can't understand how it can hang together because
Mm.
the
Yeah.
economic incentives of being a part of the federal union are just becoming fewer and fewer every day. And it's weird. I mean, I was saying to a friend here that I was like joking, but saying, I think Justin Trudeau's an Alberta separatist because he seems to be doing like everything he possibly can to make
Wow.
damn sure that Albertans have no incentive whatsoever to stay in the union. It's
Yeah.
weird. Like if you were
Yeah.
trying to hold the country together, you wouldn't be doing what he's doing.
Okay.
So I
Is
don't
it
know if it's some like 4D chess going on here.
is it like the trade-offs made like the economic incentive maybe used to be like protection, but that's an interesting question for Canada because Canada doesn't really have any threats as long as America and Canada are as partnered as they are.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think Canada's very lucky, actually, ironically, that it's got Alaska at one border and then it's got obviously the US in its entirety on the other border. So yes, I think as long as they're in friendly relations with the US, then great. If they're not in friendly relations, they're absolute toast because
Yeah.
they've got like the most armed nation at their southern border. And then, I mean, I'm not a huge expert on Canada. I've only lived here a couple of years, so this is
Okay.
just my uneducated observation. So apologies to
Okay.
anyone listening if I get this wrong. But they have the RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is like their national police force.
Right.
But there are a lot of calls for them to be disbanded at a provincial level. Um,
Hmm.
and then all of the provinces, which is the Canadian equivalent of a state, basically have autonomy over their resource usage and how their resources are managed. And this has been a big point of
Oh,
friction between Alberta and the federal government because Alberta is very oil rich and it's a very wealthy province. I think if
right.
Alberta was its own country, it would be the fourth richest, I think, by capita by GDP or something like that. So
Oh,
it's
right.
yes. I mean, as an independent country, it would be much wealthier than it is being part of the union. not helped by the fact that they're like the federal government's whipping boys. So the federal government is doing all these
Mm,
like carbon taxes, which are bizarre. They've got a very
mm,
complicated system where they charge this carbon tax and they do spend probably millions on administration, and then they give some people rebates back. And what they've started doing recently, and again, I apologize to any Canadians if I butcher this, but what they've started doing is giving uh, tax breaks to some provinces, but not others, which has obviously caused
mm.
uproar because the provinces that are getting the tax breaks are the ones like Quebec and like I think it's Nova Scotia, maybe Newfoundland. I forget some of the ones on the eastern coast, but that are more kind of in good favor, in good graces with the federal government. So it's very
Wow.
arbitrary. And I mean, you can imagine, I mean, like what the response to that is. And I just think to myself, like,
Yeah.
really, like if you're trying to hold this country together, this is not
Yeah.
the best approach. You're not winning
Yeah.
hearts and minds here. So I don't know. I mean, I live in Alberta and I've just observed since I've been here, like how pissed off the Albertans are as a collective about the situation. And I
Yeah.
just think it's only a matter of time because they're just being pushed and pushed and pushed. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting because there's a lot of Canadians, obviously, that want to stay together as a country. And I think, you
Yeah.
have an emotional tie as well to your
Yeah.
national identity. But
Oh,
if you
yeah.
look at it purely from an economic and practical standpoint, I just really struggle to see how that's going to be achieved under the current climate.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like it'll have to get a lot worse before it gets better. So I don't know. I mean, who
Yeah.
knows? But I think Texas ideologically sees itself as a separate thing. I'm not
Right.
sure so much that the province of Canada are quite as ideologically driven, but I think
Right.
just the
Right.
collection of circumstances and the economic
Yeah.
situation may be the
Something could
thing that,
happen.
yeah, that it fractures. Yeah, as a result of
Yeah.
that. So it's interesting. I mean, for me, it'd be
That's
a bit weird because, like, coming from the UK, it's like a tiny island
yeah.
with I think 80 million people. For context, Alberta has 4 million people and the landmass is much bigger than the UK. I think it's
Ah,
2.7 times the size of the UK. So to
wow.
me, I'm just like, this place is vast. I mean, I'm not sure I would even notice if it was like,
Right.
you
Right.
know?
Right.
Um, but I think if you're Canadian, it's a very different, different proposition because you've grown up with a country
Yeah.
that's always been unified. So
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting um thesis from Sovereign Individual that I haven't gotten all the way through that book. And so I think about this a lot and I need to go back to it, but it's their prediction was kind of like the nation state, it belongs to the past. And we won't carry these like emotional identities we have in our countries further on into the future, much longer. I kind of see that happening. Like you'll go to whatever country is competitive with like what kind of benefits living in that country is going to give you, or what kind of industry grows in that country, and what you're good at, and try to align what you're good at to the country that does it well so that you can do it well. But the more that happens, the more we become a global society. Yeah, I think your emotional attachments are going to loosen about like where you come from, where you belong, and that won't necessarily be a piece of land. But there's a lot to unpack about when that happens and how
yeah, I agree.
humans
And I
get
wonder what it
changed.
does to cultural identity as well, because a lot of it's
Mm,
not just about the sort of, fictitious borders that we draw around nation states. It's about
totally,
languages shared and customs and
totally.
traditions.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, really. I mean, I feel very rootless because, I'm half Finnish, I'm half British. I grew up in Italy, lived in the UK, then moved to the US. I've lived all over the world and just,
Yeah,
but I look at people who are very tied to where they come from and I'm kind of envious about it in some ways,
sure.
you
Yeah.
know?
And at the same time, right, I feel like a desire to have that sort of connection with my own property. I want to own property and I want to have that sense of belonging to it. And it's like taking responsibility for it, but also like the privilege of having a thing to claim as your own, and whatever comes out of it that you produce, kind of bolstering your own character.
So I'm curious, is this going to be like a downtown condo or is it going to be like a farm? Where are you leaning?
Definitely a farm. Definitely a farm. I want the chickens. I want the horses, the barn cats. I grow plants. So my job is taking care of plants right now. So I'm starting to gather my skills together to be that impressive farmer someday.
What do you mean your job is taking care of plants?
I am like my company gets contracted by office buildings. And so once a week, I show up and water their plants.
Oh, really? So that's
Yes,
like your day job outside of doing the Pleb
yes,
Lab stuff. Oh,
yes.
really? That's really fun. Did you start that yourself or just joined an existing?
Just joined, yeah. It's a very small company, but there's a lot of them that exist in the city. Because people
Huh.
like to have their plants close to them, but they don't like to take care of them. So
Is that purely in a corporate setting?
yes, but also some funeral homes, some nursing homes, but primarily primarily I'm in like downtown buildings.
Now I understand your Instagram because there are all these like floral arrangements, and I was like, gosh, she's really into flowers.
Yes. 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 Well, and I was working at a flower shop for a little bit as well. So I
So
would like to do that.
does that kind of I mean, do you learn a lot about plant care with that? Is it very kind of structured, or do you actually have to kind of go and understand, oh, this particular plant is, let me just test the soil, doesn't need quite as much water this week or whatever?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's both of those things. Like we have a little bit of a structure of like when we're going to fertilize plants throughout the year. So that's kind of like a seasonal basis. And that's something that the company is planned for. But then like each individual place that I go to, you can know the plant's like history, or you can know like that specific type of plant. So have an idea of like how this plant will behave. But so much of it is like a product of like its environment. So I'm going in and out of different rooms being like, I think this plant is behaving this way because this room is dark, or this room is dark at this time of day, or there's not a lot of people that go through this room, and so there's not a lot of activity.
No
And
carbon dioxide. Yeah.
you learn a lot about just like really how plants respond to humans and vice versa.
Isn't that interesting? Do you notice a difference then? So if there's a very trafficked area, do they tend to
Mhm.
flourish a bit more?
Yeah,
Oh, that's
just
so
off the
sweet.
energy, just off the activity, I
God,
think.
what does that mean? All my plants die. People give me orchids every now and then. You know, it's like one of those things
Really.
when somebody comes around for dinner, they bring you this beautiful vase with an orchid. Never have I managed to make one survive.
That's so I this is an orchid I have, and
Oh,
I
really?
I placed it there. So you may be able to see it because this is one I've been able to keep alive, and it is really hard, so that's why I'm so proud.
I've never understood why they're gifted to people. You always see them in like supermarkets in these beautiful like vases. At least in the
Yep.
UK you do. And like people always bring
Yeah,
them around for dinner and like, oh, I brought you an orchid. And I'm like, oh shit, another one's
right.
gonna die.
Right. Right. There's a lot of turnaround with orchids. Yeah, they're interesting plants, but people become obsessed with orchids in particular. And
What,
I
as
fear
in the
it's
caring
happening.
of?
Yes, I fear it's happening to me, but they're also so beautiful.
They are. Yeah, they are. I tend to go for parlor palms now because they're almost impossible to kill. I did succeed in killing some of them, but like they're almost
Yeah.
impossible to kill. So
Well,
that's what I
my
go for.
suggestion, if you just spend some more time talking to them, and they'll do a little bit better, I think. Run that experiment and let me know.
My husband's definitely going to be like, she's lost her mind. I sit there cross-legged on the floor going, how are you today, parlor palm?
Yeah, just give it a little rub.
I'll give them names.
Sure.
Henrietta in the corner there.
I think you'll have more success with the name. I've seen
That's
it.
interesting, though. That feels like a very poetic job to do as well, in some ways, that you're kind of going around talking to the plants, maybe reading them poetry.
Yeah, I get to listen to a lot of books while I'm on the job.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's
Gosh,
ideal.
you've really created quite a fascinating life for yourself. So, what's next on the horizon then? So, you're carrying on with the sticker stuff, like being
Yep.
part of the community at Pleb Lab. Obviously,
Yep.
there's some Bitcoin influence there because you're selling the stickers for Bitcoin.
Yep.
You've published a free book, but people can make donations for that on the page, right? Is that
Absolutely.
amazing?
My Ellen address is plebpoet at stacker.news. So there you go.
Nice and easy.
Um, yeah, I want to continue to like there are some like very early developer projects where I can contribute some design. So I've done that a little bit. One very interesting thing where like what I'm interested in, what I'm good at crosses with this stuff that I didn't expect is somebody hired me to write a poem for their website about their product. So
Mm.
if you go to their website, first thing you're going to see is a little, and it rhymes, a little cute little rhyming scheme by me telling you about the product. So who knew? That could be a good marketing ploy.
That's actually amazing. Yeah, because I think a lot of people really struggle with copy in general, but
Yeah.
just making things sound interesting. I was reading a couple of your Substack articles and they were just so flowery. I was like, oh, this isn't like the usual
Yeah.
kind of thing where it's very, kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know, how to operational, I guess.
Information. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm about. I'm not necessarily trying to give you like a how-to or this is what I think, so you should think it, but it's more like from my experience, and if you happen to learn anything from my experience, that's great. And
Well, that's
maybe you'll help
amazing.
them.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jana. Sorry, I just realized we're 5 minutes over, so apologies
That's
for running
okay.
you over. But that's been a fascinating story. What a journey. And oh my
Yeah,
God.
I'm happy to tell it. It's fun. It's definitely been a good time to live it.
Yeah. Well, I hope we get to chat in more detail next time. So wherever are you
Great.
going to Nashville? Is that on your cards?
The for TabConf. No, that's in Atlanta. Nashville, I want to go. I want to go to Bitcoin Park. When's the next thing?
So the Bitcoin conference is down in Nashville from the 25th of July to the 27th.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the Bitcoin conference is one I haven't gotten to yet. I may go to that. I may try to go because I would like to visit Nashville. I think that's a great
Okay.
place for it.
Yeah, I do as well. Actually, I hope they stay there. To be honest, because I'm not a
Yeah.
massive fan of Miami. It's okay, but it's not my favorite place to
Right.
go. Like, it's not
Right.
up there on my list of places where I want to spend my time. So, I went
Yep.
last year
Much
because I
near
hadn't
me.
been to the Bitcoin conference before. But yeah, if it was
Yeah.
there again this year, I don't think I'd bother. But with Nashville, I'm like, yeah, kind of
Yeah.
like the
Right.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah. I hope I run into you again.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'll see you there. Well, I'll keep you posted then
Okay.
on my movements, and if you're planning on
Great.
being there, let me know. It'd be really cool. All right, well, thanks so much. Oh,
Great.
little dog
Yeah.
shuffling again.
Well, I'll
Amazing.
be
Thanks so much for
following.
your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a great day.